edition of Dateline USA. I'm Bill Widder, and we're going to celebrate the 75th anniversary of one of the greatest, maybe the greatest, certainly the most enduringly influential science fiction film in motion picture history. The film is Metropolis, and I'm not going to get into when it was produced or when it was released, because Forrest Ackerman, who is with us today, along with Brad Linerweaver, will deal with all of that material as we get into the rest of the show. The film was directed by Fritz Lang, with a script by Lang and his wife Thea von Harbou. Did I get that right, gentlemen? From her novel. To talk about Metropolis with us on this show are two of the world's most foremost authorities. Mr. Science Fiction himself, Mr. Sci-Fi, the man who invented the term, editor, publisher, writer, anthologist, critic, filmmaker, actor, and owner and curator of the world's most, celebrated, surely, collection of science fiction, fantasy, horror, and Metropolis memorabilia, including the famous Metropolis robot. Maria-Trix something.
The Robotrix.
Robotrix, right, thank you. And his companion, award-winning author, critic, reviewer, literary historian, screenwriter, actor, and Forrest J. Ackerman collaborator, Brad Linerweaver. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. We've seen some footage from the film already. Why don't we start with its birth? When was it produced? When was it released? A little of its early history.
Well, it was produced over a period of 2 years, but on January 10th, 1927, at the Uferpalast in Berlin, the world first saw Metropolis in its entire version. Fritz Lang had photographed 49 times as much footage as ever reached the screen. And all around the world, I've chased down 6 different versions of it behind the Iron Curtain when we had that Berlin Wall, and down in Australia, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm still waiting to see a restored full-length version of it.
You've written about this film.
Yes, well, I would quarrel with one part of your introduction, Bill. I'm not a Metropolis expert. I'm an Ackerman expert.
An Ackerman
Everything
expert.
I know about Metropolis, I know from this man.
I apologize, and I stand corrected.
But I remember when I was a kid, I got the ace paperback of Thea von Harbou's novel of Metropolis, because she wrote the script and the novel, which is kind of parallel to Arthur C. Clarke writing the novel and working on the screenplay for 2001: A Space Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And I noticed the introduction to that edition was from Forrest J. Ackerman. And I believe, maybe we should ask Forrest, are you the reason that novel reached America?
No, it had reached America prior to that, but it was the first time that it was in the paperback form.
It was Ace, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. But like I say, it's like Forrest's old magazine. Spaceman talked about Metropolis, and so I would read the magazines, I'd read the books, and every time I learned something else about Metropolis, the byline said Forrest J. Ackerman.
I'm going to pose a question. This is probably inflammatory. We talked about it before the show began. Well, let's burn it down. According to one source that I encountered, Thea von Harbou took the context of her novel from an earlier novel by a French writer named Widder de L'Isle Adam, published in 1886, called the Future Eve. You said you recognized the novel, but according to this source, and sources for me are always impeachable, so there was a robot in that novel called Hadley, or Hadley, or Adelaide, or something, and the encyclopedia, or whatever source I got this from, suggested that Thea had been inspired to buy that, to incorporate the robot into Metropolis. Do you know anything about that, although I know you're familiar with the novel?
Well, no, it's the first time on this program that I've heard that. I am familiar with the novel and an English translation of it, although I haven't personally read it. but 50,000 sci-fi fantasy books at home. I'll have to go home directly after this interview and check that out.
Well, it was new.
I've heard a different rumor. I heard that Thea von Harbou got a time machine, went into the future, saw Star Wars, was so influenced by C-3PO, she went back in time and came up with Maria.
We haven't seen any of the footage yet, and I assume it's going to start rolling pretty soon. But I just saw Frankenstein again, the James Whale film, and of course that's a classic of its own kind. But I was struck by something because I had seen the Metropolis footage. And that is that when that Kenneth Strickfaden set and all of the electrical equipment and the monster, if you will, Karloff, is lying on, and it looked exactly like that scene in Metropolis, where the form of the robot is brought to life electrically.
Even more so in Bride of Frankenstein. In the sequel, James Whale's second Frankenstein film, I think the sequence where the Elizabeth Lanchester character, the Bride of Frankenstein, is brought to life, owes even more to the Metropolis robot creation scene than the original Frankenstein, in my estimation, in terms of specific images.
Let me ask you about influences. According to, and this is merely my reconstruction and may have no relevance at all, a lot of this movie, a lot of the new well, first of all, he had been in New York, right, in 1922 or somewhere in there, and had seen the New York skyline and had gone to town. That had something to do with what we see in that film.
Absolutely, it inspired him
to create this, the image of Metropolis that we have. But later in the film, where you get the Tower of Babylon, I felt there was a lingering influence from D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, gentlemen, which had been released in 1916, 10 years before.
Well, you know, Forrest knew Fritz Lang personally.
You did?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you tell us? I didn't know that.
Yes, one of the proudest moments of my life, Rio de Janeiro, during a fantasy film festival. They wanted Fritz up on the stage to fend questions about Metropolis. He rose, he put his hand on my shoulder, said, "Anything you want to know about Metropolis, ask my friend Forrest Ackerman. He knows more about it than I do." I've just seen it for the 98th time, and I'm heading toward 100.
Let me ask you, okay. There is another, here we go. Here we go, gentlemen. Let's take a look at this. What we're looking at, I guess, is what for it? Brad?
Well, this is the Moloch machine that blows up and is devouring the workers as they...
That's
Moloch.
All right.
It's the dark side of the Industrial Revolution. This is a criticism of the workers' conditions in factories in the modern era, but it's also drawing parallels to these old stories of the past about pagan idols that people would be sacrificed to. And it's an interesting image because you've got this pre-industrial image from thousands of years ago of human sacrifice to a pagan idol combined with modern technology and then projected into the future as a commentary on the condition of workers in the world at the time this movie was made in the late 1920s.
Moloch is the god of what, war?
Well, I think it's just kind of a combination of old pagan idols. I mean, well, the idea when the gods are not exactly interested in us except as sacrificial objects, and the idea that the gods were very cruel and could only be satisfied with human sacrifice. So you get Bible stories combined with super scientific technological imagery, and it's an unforgettable image because so many different things are going on here subconsciously. Fritz Lang was a genius at picking the right picture to make your mind work overtime.
There is a scene like a matching scene at the end when they're moving into what appears to be, this mob is moving into what appears to be the entrance to a cathedral. That is sort of the parallel, the analog of this, in which they're moving into the mouth of Moloch.
Well, at the end you could say they've been in the darkness and now they're moving into the light.
Rotwang's glove is the deformed side of society. That's the Gothic. That's the other thing.
Well, Rotvang's the ultimate mad scientist. You should tell, Forrest once again knows more about mad scientists than anybody else. So let's talk to him about Rotvang.
Rotvang.
Well, Rotvang is a German, and oddly enough, it just means red cheek. I guess if you say it kind of quickly, red chick. Yeah, Kleinroger was the ultimate mad scientist.
You think he influenced later performances?
Absolutely.
In other mad labs?
Yes, yes.
We're looking at the city. Well, now we're looking at the very thing that I guess Lang brought back from New York City.
Oh, yeah, you can see the New York City influence
here. You can see the New York City influence. There's another thing that I think...
You see the little rocket?
Yep.
The little, like, Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers rocket goes zooming across there?
That's interesting. Where, according to one source, this film projects two distinct images that seem to have grown out as well, and we talked about this briefly before the show began, and I'll ask Forrest. I had a sense, and I look at the workers in the depths of the city, in hell, I assume, and you look at Feddersen and his son living in the pleasure gardens at the top. It suggested to me, at least, nothing nothing as much as the Eloi and the Morlocks in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, and I wonder whether you've ever considered it that way.
I'm sure that Wells's Time Machine influenced all the science fiction that came afterward, but you know, it's ironic that Wells did not like the film Metropolis, and when he worked with Korda in England to make Things to Come, he would say that Things to Come was an answer to Metropolis, and what I think is interesting is one of Forrest's favorite movies after Metropolis is Things to Come, right?
That's
so
right.
Do you want to compare the two films?
Well, they're almost not comparable. The Metropolis, of course, was silent, was a little square screen, and introduced the video phone and had a rocket in it. But Wells was more up-to-date in his prediction of 100 years in the future, and the final space gun that shot them off to the moon.
I think Wells had a more optimistic vision, of course, of technology in the future. And Metropolis is definitely a darker vision, isn't it, of technology?
Yes.
Let me ask another question then, because I tried to go into the history of the film up to that point and for a few years afterward. There had been a history in Germany of films about android or humanoid or robot-like figures. 2 years before, 7 years before, in 1920, Paul Wegener had directed The Golem. Is there any link between these two films? Do you think the one suggested the other? Is there any influence there?
Well, there were 3 or 4 golems actually, and I think they had more influence we see in the original Frankenstein.
Forrest, I'm going to have to stop you. We're going to take a break.
Okay.
We're going to go to some more footage. Dateline USA will be back shortly. Stay with us, please. Welcome back to Dateline USA. Our guests, my guests today, and I'm delighted to have them, are Mr. Sci-Fi himself, Forrest Ackerman, and my dear friend and author and
collaborator,
Ackerman collaborator, Brad Lineweaver.
I collaborate with everybody, Forrest and you, Bill. I'm just looking for collaborators.
According to my information, this movie cost $5 million to make. That was an enormous amount of money. And somewhere in there it said there's those scenes where they're going into the Moloch machine and the scenes where the masked workers are moving into the cathedral, or whatever it was, involved 30,000 extras. Is that right? Is that...
That's right, and when they showed the film in China, they shot a little sequence all of their own of Chinese workers creating the Tower of Babel.
You wrote an article about Metropolis.
Oh, yes.
For a magazine. Why don't we take...
Yes, this is an interview I did with the foremost Metropolis expert I could find, Forrest J. Ackerman.
Who? Who? What is that about?
Well, I did the same thing you're doing, Bill. I asked 40 questions, and by golly, he had the answer to every one. We also talked about some of the political aspects of Metropolis that we haven't gotten into yet. Let's not forget that this is, there's a reason for Metropolis to be a darker vision of the future than Things to Come. Things to Come was made in England, which had a much better political situation, didn't it, than Germany? Because all these films made between World War I and World War II in Germany, there's a reason for them to be pessimistic. Consider what's in the future. It's almost as if they knew that the Nazis were coming. And it makes sense
you
that
had
these...
a sense of that, absolutely.
It makes sense that these would be darker films and more paranoid films.
Let me ask you a question. I'm fascinated always between the apparent, somewhere again, and maybe it is in Fred Pohl's book, I guess science fiction in the movies, the one he wrote with his son. He talks about the glove, Rotwang's glove, and he makes a very definite point that there is also a glove on the hand of Dr. Strangelove in Dr. Strangelove, or How I Came to Love the Bomb.
You know, it's more than a glove, it's an artificial hand. In the case of both Rotwang and Dr. Strangelove, they've lost their hand. And this is a mechanical hand.
I didn't know
which,
that.
Of course, the actor's wearing a black glove, but what you're supposed to be seeing is a completely artificial hand.
What we're looking at now is what for? That's the robot.
That's the robotrix, Ultima Futura Automaton, and she is being ordered to rise by Rotwang, her inventor.
Who is on the left with his back toward us? Is that Fader?
That is the master of Metropolis.
That is Faderson.
Yes. Alfred Abel.
Alfred Abel.
And the name of the actress in the costume?
Brigitte Helm, 16-year-old actress.
What is going on there?
There's the hand.
There is the hand. And there it is. Isn't it worth the loss of a hand to have
Created the workers of the future, the machine men.
Is that what this is about?
Well,
Is that what
they're going to ultimately replace the workers with robots. That is one of the aspects of Metropolis, that ultimately the workers will become irrelevant if they can be replaced with a robot workforce.
I have to ask another literary question. Either gentleman, or throw it up. Karl Koppak's play, R.U.R., had been produced when?
Before he won
about 1922, Chopek, it was pronounced. Karl Chopek.
Didn't know that. Didn't know that. All of my immense ignorance is being displayed egregiously on this show.
Well, it's Rawson's Universal Robots.
That's right.
There was
oddly enough, they were androids. You know, they were not mechanical creatures as we think of robots.
What is an android? What is the difference?
An android looks like a human. A robot looks like a machine. Robbie the Robot in Forbidden Planet, Gort and The Day the Earth Stood Still. We think of those when we think of robots, R2-D2 and Star Wars. An android looks like us here. We are androids. People watching the show think we're flesh and blood, but we're really a super version of animatronics. we would be androids if we were artificial. We'd look just like ourselves.
I feel like an android. What's a humanoid?
Well,
there we go. That's the one. That has always...
the clock.
What is that clock about?
That tells us we're running out of time on this show.
We're running out of time. I'm leaving now. What does the clock stand for? I've never known. It's one of the most famous scenes in the history of the movies.
Well, for 10 hours you had to stand in front of the clock machine, and every time a light went on to move to that, and just in order to keep the whole thing functioning topside.
So whoever is doing that, and at some point the son takes over, does he not?
It's also a symbol. It's symbolic of being trapped in the work session, that if he cannot escape from it, if he doesn't do his job, as we know in the film, if anybody fails to do that job, you have a disaster. You have a steam buildup and an explosion. So it's a job, it's a life and death job, as a matter of fact. And can you imagine the tedium of having to do that for 10 hours? It's a commentary on working on the assembly line.
Which was relatively new then.
Yes.
Because Ford had, I guess, essentially institutionalized it.
Oh, Henry Ford is one of the people who changed the world forever, that's sure.
And this is really a statement about that. This is really a reflection on it. In 1923, Chaney did The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I have a sense these crowd scenes, where did he get that from? Had he done that earlier? I can't remember Mabuse, which had, I guess he had,
It's Mabusa.
Is it Mabuse?
It's pronounced Mabusa.
See? I've spent years mispronouncing all of this.
I learned how to pronounce it from 4 years ago. Well, I've seen the films too. They say Mabusa in Testament of Dr. Mabusa, The Thousand Eyes of Dr. Mabusa. That's how it's pronounced.
Here we go. This is pretty Strickfaden, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Who did the? Do you remember who did the set design?
I think a man named Kettlehoot.
Kettlehoot. There are, when I looked at this, and then I saw the Karloff Frankenstein, the James Whale Frankenstein, it felt as if I was watching almost the same motion picture. Yeah, again, Frankenstein is on the monster is on the table, the bride is on the table.
All those films. And this actor was Fritz Lang's favorite villain actor because he played Mabusa as well. This is the same actor.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he was always playing villains, wasn't he, Forrest?
Yes.
Great villain.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the...
Ah, there we go. That's my favorite shot in all of Metropolis.
This scene, of course, has influenced...
So much science fiction, so many of them. You can't even begin to list all the films that have been influenced by these shots. They're so ahead of their time. That's another thing. It's hard to believe how far back this is being done and how good it looks. It holds up with today's special effects. That's what I really can't get over.
Again, I must look to you, gentlemen, because all of my information about this is derivative. The way they did this, it was either the way they did this or the way they did it in Frankenstein. They something that sparked electricity right in front of the camera lens to create this effect.
You know what that effect was? I met the man in 1951 who created it. He said he took little bubbles from Christmas trees and swang them around.
Wow.
that's what made that effect.
The circles around the robot.
Around the robot? Is that how that was done?
Yeah.
Around the robot? Is that how that was done?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Again, there was a very learned discussion of this film. It must appear learned to me. It's not in Fred Pohl's book, but it is it's one of in these didactic journals. It talks again about the Gothic, the fact that Rotwang, we're looking at the laboratory scene, but Rotwang lives in a house with a pentagram on the door. Why?
Well, because he's a magician and a wizard as well as a mad scientist. Lang is great at combining images of the past with images of the future. And I think that's the reason, Forrest, don't you agree that one of the reasons Metropolis is unique and it's never been remade and it's so distinct from so many other films is it combines images of the past and the future so smoothly?
Absolutely, yes.
It's, where's the quote from the end here? I noted it down because I was struck by it, although we're between the hand that creates and the hand that builds, the heart must be the mediator.
Yes.
Is that the theme of this? And that creates in the hand that builds. What is the difference? What are we looking at with Rotvang's? Oh, those two hands.
Well, actually, Rotvang's a side issue for that. The message of the film is simply better relations between management and labor.
Labor,
And let's face it, Rotvang would have created endless chaos and destruction, which he does anyway, the destruction of the workers' community. In a way, Rotvang's almost a side issue to what happens at the end when the leader of the workers and Fredersen, the man who is the master of Metropolis, shake hands, and the son brings their two hands together to shake hands.
He's the mediator.
Yeah, he's the mediator. He's the heart. The son actually is the heart, and management and labor are going to start having a better relationship once the mad scientist has been killed off. Remember, this comes right after Rotvang falls to his death from the Gothic cathedral after chasing the heroine around. So Rotvang is not bringing anybody together. He's splitting people apart.
He's splitting. Somewhere again, that chase through the dark in his house where Maria is fleeing from him, it suggests it's sort of labyrinthian. Somebody said it's really the 9 circles of hell enveloped in darkness. Am I reading too much into this?
No, because I think Lang puts all that stuff in there, don't you, Forrest?
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, we actually had more footage to show. We're not going to get a chance to do it. We're out of time. Rotvang was ultimately out of time. I want to thank Forrest, Ackerman, Mr. Sci-Fi, and Brad Lineweaver, author and famed Ackerman collaborator, for doing the show today. This is Dateline USA. I'm Bill Widder. We've been watching the 75th anniversary presentation and commentary on Metropolis. We'll see you next time.